CEO mom tells her kids to move out. The kitchen was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Victoria Brennan stood at the marble island, 3 cream-colored envelopes laid out in front of her like cards in a high-stakes game. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her wine glass, the red liquid catching the last rays of afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the California hills rolled in waves of gold and green, peaceful and unaware of the storm about to break inside this house. She could hear them upstairs. The thud of a shoe hitting the floor. The tinny echo of a video playing too loud. The murmur of a phone conversation that would stretch on for another hour at least. Her children, 27, 24, and 22 years old. Adults by every measure, except the ones that mattered. Victoria set down the glass and pressed her palms flat against the cool stone countertop. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened oven door. 51 years old. CEO of a tech consulting firm she had built from nothing. Recently divorced. Exhausted in a way that sleep could never fix. She picked up the first envelope. Marcus. Her eldest. The boy who used to wait by the window for her to come home from work. Who used to draw pictures of rockets and tell her he wanted to change the world. Now he was upstairs in his childhood bedroom, unemployed for 2 years, convinced the perfect job would simply appear if he waited long enough. The second envelope, Sienna, her only daughter, the girl who used to dance in the living room, who used to write poetry on napkins and leave them on Victoria's pillow. Now she was a ghost of ambition, a grad school dropout turned Instagram dreamer, living off credit cards Victoria paid every month without question. The third envelope, Jordan. Her baby. The child who used to ask her 1,000 questions before bed, who used to fall asleep reading encyclopedias. Now he was a perpetual student with no direction, changing majors the way some people changed hairstyles, floating through life like it was all just practice. Victoria had written these letters on a plane somewhere over Greenland, while businessmen around her slept with their mouths open and the cabin lights dimmed to a gentle blue. She had written them in a single sitting, her pen moving across expensive stationery with a clarity she had not felt in years. She heard footsteps on the stairs, multiple sets. They were coming down together, which meant they wanted something. Marcus appeared first, tall and effortlessly handsome in the way 27-year-old men are when they have never had to work for anything. His hair was still wet from a shower. He wore joggers and a Supreme hoodie that had cost $300. "Hey, Mom," he said, barely glancing at her as he opened the refrigerator. "Can I borrow the Audi tonight? Meeting some people in the city." Sienna followed close behind, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, yoga pants clinging to legs that had logged more hours on Pilates reformers than Victoria cared to calculate. She scrolled through her phone without looking up. Also, Sienna added absently, "My credit card got declined at SoulCycle. Can you call the bank?" Jordan was last, still boyish at 22 despite the patchy beard he was trying to grow. He grabbed a LaCroix from the fridge and popped it open with a crisp hiss. "What's for dinner?" he asked, leaning against the counter. Victoria looked at them, really looked at them. 3 people she had carried in her body, birthed in pain and joy, raised with a ferocity that had nearly consumed her. 3 people who had become strangers in her own home. "Sit down," she said quietly. Marcus did not move. "I'm kind of in a hurry." "Sit down." Something in her tone made them freeze. Sienna's thumb stopped mid-scroll. Jordan's hand paused halfway to his mouth. Marcus turned slowly, his brow furrowing. "What's going on?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Victoria gestured to the dining table behind her. "Sit!" They exchanged glances, the silent language of siblings who had spent a lifetime forming alliances against parental authority. Slowly, reluctantly, they moved to the table and sat. Victoria remained standing. She picked up the 3 envelopes and held them against her chest, feeling the weight of what they contained. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice steady and calm, the same voice she used in boardrooms when delivering quarterly reports that could make or break careers. "And I need you to listen without interrupting." Sienna rolled her eyes. "Is this about the dishes? I was going to do them." "It's not about the dishes," Victoria said. "It's about your lives. And mine. The room went quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked. The refrigerator hummed its monotonous song. The house settled in that way old houses do, creaking softly like bones. Victoria took a breath, filling her lungs with air that tasted like courage and fear mixed together. "I need you to move out," she said, "all of you, by the end of summer." The words landed like stones in still water. For a moment no one moved, no one spoke. They just stared at her, faces blank with incomprehension, as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Then Marcus laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "What?" "You heard me," Victoria said calmly. "I need you out of this house. 3 months. That is more than fair." Sienna's phone clattered to the table. "Are you serious right now?" "Completely." Jordan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed defensively across his chest. "This is because of Dad, isn't it? You're having some kind of midlife crisis." "This has nothing to do with your father," Victoria interrupted, her voice hardening just slightly like steel wrapped in silk. "This is about you. About all of you." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that made Victoria wince. "After everything we gave up because of your career? After all those years of nannies and missed recitals and you being gone all the time?" There it was. The wound she had known was coming. The guilt they had learned to weaponize with surgical precision. Victoria met his eyes without flinching. "What exactly did you give up, Marcus? Please, enlighten me." He faltered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. You weren't there." "I was building a company," she said quietly, each word carefully chosen and deliberately placed. "So you could have this house, so you could go to private school, so you could have everything you ever asked for and more. I was working so you would not have to worry about money, about security, about your future." "We didn't ask for that," Sienna shot back, her voice rising with anger and something else, something that sounded like pain. "We just wanted a mom." Victoria felt the sting, sharp and familiar. She had felt it 1,000 times before. In parent-teacher conferences she had arrived late to, still wearing her work badge. In family photos where she was the one missing, the empty space beside her children. In the careful distance they had learned to keep, the way they had learned to expect her absence more than her presence. But this time, she did not flinch. "You had a mom," she said. "You still do, but I also had a career. I also had dreams. And I am tired of apologizing for that." "So this is punishment?" Jordan asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Because we didn't appreciate you enough?" "No," Victoria said, and her voice softened like sunlight breaking through clouds. "This isn't punishment. This is love." Sienna scoffed, a harsh sound that filled the kitchen. "Kicking us out is love?" Victoria set the envelopes on the table, sliding one in front of each of them with the precision of a dealer in a card game. "Open them," she said. They stared at the envelopes like they might contain bombs or curses. Finally, Marcus grabbed his and ripped it open, his fingers clumsy with anger. His eyes scanned the page once, twice, his face going pale. Sienna and Jordan opened theirs more slowly, reading in silence that felt heavier than words. The letter was short, written in Victoria's precise handwriting. "By the end of August, you will need to find your own housing. I will cover your first 3 months of rent, wherever you choose to live, as well as a security deposit. After that, you are on your own. This is not negotiable. This is not a discussion. This is me giving you the gift I never had, the chance to build something of your own. I love you more than you will ever know, but I will not watch you waste your lives anymore, Mom." The silence that followed was different, heavier, angrier, like the air before lightning strikes. "Where are we supposed to go?" Sienna whispered, and for the first time, Victoria heard something other than entitlement in her voice. She heard fear. "Anywhere you want," Victoria said gently. "You are all capable. You are all smart. You just have not had a reason to try." Marcus crumpled the letter in his fist. "This is insane. Rent is crazy expensive. I can't just." "You can," Victoria interrupted. "You have a degree. You have connections. You have every advantage most people would kill for." "I have student loans," he shot back. "That I have been paying," Victoria said, "along with your car insurance, your phone bill, your gym membership, your everything." He opened his mouth, then closed it, the fight draining from his face. Jordan stood up, his eyes red. I can't believe you're doing this." "I know," Victoria said. And she did. She knew they would hate her. She knew they would call her cruel, selfish, heartless. She knew because she had spent 3 months in therapy preparing for this exact moment, working through the guilt, the fear, the voice that whispered she was a terrible mother. But she also knew something else. She knew that Marcus had been looking for a job for 2 years and had not sent out a single resume in the last 6 months. She knew that Sienna had dropped out of grad school and spent her days photographing lattes and calling it a career. She knew that Jordan had changed majors 4 times and still had no idea what he wanted to do with his life. She knew because she had enabled it, she had made it too easy. She had given them a life without consequences, without struggle, without the very things that had made her who she was. And she could not do it anymore. "I'm not abandoning you," she said, her voice trembling now, just slightly, like a string pulled too tight. "I'm saving you from yourselves, and maybe," she paused, swallowing hard, "maybe from me." Sienna's eyes welled with tears. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to just decide." "I do," Victoria said firmly. "This is my house, my name on the deed, my decision." Marcus shook his head, grabbing his keys from the counter with a violent motion. "This is bullshit." He stormed toward the door, his footsteps heavy and angry. Jordan followed without a word, his shoulders hunched like a man walking into a storm. Sienna stayed seated, staring at the letter in her hands as if it might change if she looked at it long enough. "Mom," she whispered, "please." Victoria's heart cracked down the middle. She wanted to take it back. Wanted to say it was a joke, a test, a moment of madness brought on by too much wine and too little sleep. Wanted to pull her daughter into her arms and promise everything would stay the same. But she did not. 3 months, she said softly. "I believe in you, Sienna, even if you don't believe in yourself yet." Sienna stood, wiping her eyes roughly with the back of her hand. "I'll never forgive you for this." She walked out, her footsteps echoing through the empty house. Victoria sank into a chair and let herself cry, not from guilt, not from regret, but from relief. Relief that she had finally done what she should have done years ago. Relief that the weight she had been carrying, the weight of their futures pressing down on her shoulders, was finally being redistributed to where it belonged. On them. The sun had dipped below the hills now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The wineglass still sat on the counter, half empty. The house felt enormous suddenly, silent in a way it had not been since the day Marcus was born 27 years ago. Victoria stood and walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the world continued turning. Cars passed on the street below. Lights flickered on in neighboring houses. Life went on, indifferent to the small earthquake that had just shaken the foundation of this family. She thought about her own mother, a woman who had worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, who had never once complained, who had taught Victoria that love was not about comfort. It was about preparation. It was about giving your children the tools they needed to survive without you. Her mother had died when Victoria was 23, too young to truly appreciate the lesson she had been given. But standing here now, looking out at the darkening sky, Victoria finally understood. Love was not always soft. Sometimes it was steel. The weeks that followed were brutal in ways Victoria had not fully anticipated. The house, once filled with the chaos of 3 adult children, now echoed with silence. Not the peaceful silence of solitude, but the heavy silence of absence, of things left unsaid and bridges burned. Marcus moved out first. Within a week, his anger propelling him faster than Victoria had expected. He packed his things in trash bags and boxes, refusing her help, refusing even to look at her. He crashed with a friend in Oakland, a guy he had known from college who dealt poker on weekends and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like stale beer and broken dreams. His texts to Victoria were cold, transactional, stripped of any warmth. "Need the first month's rent you promised." She sent it, without comment, without lecture, without the urge to remind him that this was exactly what the letter had outlined. The money arrived in his account within an hour. He did not say thank you. Sienna stayed longer, using passive aggression as her weapon of choice. She left dirty dishes in the sink, piled high like a monument to resentment. She played music loud enough to vibrate the walls, choosing songs with lyrics about betrayal and abandonment. But late at night, when she thought Victoria was asleep, Sienna scrolled through apartment listings on her phone, the glow of the screen illuminating her face in the darkness. Victoria saw it all: the anger, the fear, the slow, grudging acceptance that this was real, that her mother was not going to change her mind, that the safety net had been removed and the fall was coming whether she was ready or not. Jordan was the hardest to watch. He did not yell or slam doors or play music too loud. He just went quiet, slipping in and out of the house like a ghost. He avoided Victoria's eyes when they passed in the hallway. He ate meals in his room. He disappeared for hours without explanation. Victoria wanted to reach out, to pull him close, to tell him it would be okay, but she knew that would defeat the purpose. This was not about her comfort. It was about theirs, about forcing them to confront the reality they had been avoiding for years. One evening in late July, Victoria found Jordan sitting in the backyard by the empty pool. The sun had set hours ago, and the air had cooled to that perfect temperature that only California summer nights can achieve. He sat on the edge of the concrete, his feet dangling over the side, staring at the deep end like it held answers to questions he had not yet learned to ask. Victoria stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching him. Then she walked over and sat beside him, saying nothing at first, just letting the silence settle between them like a familiar guest. "I don't know how to do this," Jordan said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Victoria said. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail," she said simply, "and then you try again." He turned to look at her, really look at her, and for the first time in years she saw the little boy who used to hold her hand crossing the street, who used to ask her why the sky was blue and whether stars have feelings. "Did you ever fail?" he asked. Victoria laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised them both. "Constantly. My first company went under in 6 months. I was 38, divorced, broke, and terrified. I thought my life was over." "How did you keep going?" "Because staying down hurt worse than getting back up." Jordan nodded slowly, processing this information like it was a new language he was trying to learn. "I'm scared," he said quietly. "Good," Victoria said. "That means you're paying attention." They sat there in silence for a while longer, the California night wrapping around them like a blanket. Above them, stars flickered in the vast darkness, indifferent witnesses to the small human dramas unfolding below. Eventually, Jordan stood. He looked down at Victoria, and for just a moment, she saw something shift in his eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. A crack in the wall he had built between them. "I'm going to figure this out," he said. "I know you will," Victoria replied. He walked back into the house without another word, leaving Victoria alone by the empty pool. She stayed there for a long time, watching the stars, feeling the weight of her decision settle into her bones. It was the right choice, she knew that. But knowing something is right does not make it hurt less. By mid-August, the house was empty for the first time in 27 years. Marcus had found a studio apartment in the East Bay, a tiny box of a place with a shared bathroom down the hall and a view of a parking lot. But it was his. He had signed the lease himself, using the money Victoria had given him, and he had started bartending at a dive bar in downtown Oakland to cover the rent after the 3 months ran out. He hated it. The late nights, the drunk customers, the smell of spilled beer that clung to his clothes no matter how many times he washed them. But he showed up, every shift, on time, because the alternative was worse. Sienna had landed a job at a boutique marketing firm, entry-level, unglamorous, answering phones and making coffee runs for people barely older than her. The pay was terrible. The hours were long. But it was hers. She had gotten it on her own, without Victoria's connections, without her mother's name opening doors. And there was something quietly powerful about that. She moved into a small one-bedroom in the Haight, sharing the space with a roommate who worked nights and left passive-aggressive notes about dishes. It was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself. But it was real. Jordan enrolled in community college, surprising everyone, including himself. He moved into a shared house with 3 roommates, all of them broke and ambitious in equal measure. The house was loud and messy and smelled like microwave ramen and unwashed laundry. But for the first time in his life, Jordan felt like he was moving towards something instead of just floating. Victoria walked through the quiet rooms of her home, her footsteps echoing on hardwood floors that suddenly seemed too large. She had redecorated, sold furniture that held too many memories, turned Marcus's old room into a home office with a standing desk and a view of the hills. Sienna's room became a yoga studio, empty except for a mat and a wall of mirrors. Jordan's room was now a guest room, neutral and impersonal, waiting for visitors who might never come. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood on the deck, watching the sun set over the hills in shades of orange and purple. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Sienna. "Got my first paycheck today. Took myself to dinner. Thought you should know." Victoria smiled, tears stinging her eyes. She typed back quickly, her fingers moving with purpose. "Proud of you." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Thanks, Mom, for everything, even the hard stuff." Victoria set the phone down and looked out at the sky, painted in fire and gold. The air smelled like eucalyptus and possibility. She had lost them, and in losing them, she had given them back to themselves. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Autumn arrived like a whisper, painting the California hills in shades of amber and rust. The days grew shorter. The air turned crisp in the mornings, warming by noon, cooling again by evening. Victoria threw herself into work with a focus she had not felt in years, the kind of focused intensity that comes when you finally stop carrying other people's weight. The company launched a new platform, a consulting tool for mid-sized tech firms that caught fire faster than anyone had predicted. Investors circled like sharks sensing blood in the water, her calendar filled with meetings, conferences, keynote speeches. She stood on stages in cities she had never visited and told her story to rooms full of strangers who listened with the kind of attention usually reserved for prophets. But the house stayed quiet. She liked it that way. There was something deeply satisfying about coming home to silence, about making dinner for one without apology, about reading in bed without the sound of footsteps overhead or voices carrying through walls. She had forgotten what it felt like to exist without the constant low-grade anxiety of wondering what her children needed, what crisis was brewing, what bill was about to come due. She had forgotten what it felt like to just be Victoria. Not Victoria the mother, not Victoria the ex-wife, not Victoria the woman who sacrificed everything. Just Victoria, a woman who had built something from nothing and was still building. One evening in late October, she was in the kitchen, making dinner for herself. Just pasta. Simple. A glass of red wine. The kind of meal that tastes better when you are not trying to impress anyone. The sauce simmered on the stove, filling the house with the smell of garlic and tomatoes. The doorbell rang. Victoria frowned. She was not expecting anyone. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the front door, peering through the peephole. All 3 of them stood there. Marcus held a bottle of wine in one hand, expensive, the kind he would never have bought 6 months ago. Sienna carried a white bakery box tied with string. Jordan had flowers, slightly wilted but earnest, the kind you pick up at a grocery store because you forgot until the last minute but still want to show you care. Victoria opened the door slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. "We came to say thank you," Marcus said, and his voice was different, steadier, older, like he had aged years in just a few months. Victoria blinked, overwhelmed. "For what?" "For kicking us out," Sienna said with a small smile that reached her eyes. "For making us grow up." Jordan stepped forward. "Can we come in?" Victoria nodded, stepping aside, her throat too tight to speak. They filed past her into the house, and the energy was different. They moved with purpose, with awareness, like they were visiting instead of occupying, like they understood the difference between a home and a hotel. They gathered in the kitchen, the same kitchen where she had delivered the news that had shattered their comfortable world, but now the energy was lighter, warmer, real. Marcus opened the wine with practiced ease, pouring 4 glasses with the kind of attention that comes from working in a bar. Sienna set the bakery box on the counter and opened it to reveal a chocolate cake with imperfect frosting. "I made it myself," she said, almost shyly. "It's probably terrible." Jordan arranged the flowers in a vase he found under the sink, his movements careful and deliberate. They sat around the kitchen island, not at the formal dining table, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they talked. Really talked. Marcus told her about the promotion he had just gotten at the bar, assistant manager. It came with a raise and health insurance and actual responsibilities. He talked about the regulars he had gotten to know, the ones who tipped well, and the ones who shared their life stories over whiskey. He talked about how hard it was, and how good it felt to earn something. Sienna pulled out her phone and showed Victoria a campaign she had designed. Small, local, for a coffee shop trying to rebrand. But it was hers. Her idea, her execution, her name in the credits. She talked about the client meeting where she had pitched the concept, how her hands had shaken, how she had almost thrown up in the bathroom before walking in, but she had done it, and they had said yes. Jordan talked about his classes, about a professor who had taken an interest in his work, about a major he actually cared about, environmental science. He wanted to work on climate solutions, on making the world better in tangible ways. He talked about his roommates, about late-night study sessions and shared grocery runs and learning to budget for the first time in his life. Victoria listened, heart full, realizing something she had not expected. They were not here because they needed her. They were here because they wanted to be. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the kind of comfortable silences that only come when people truly know each other. The pasta grew cold on the stove. The wine bottle emptied. The chocolate cake, which was actually pretty good, disappeared slice by slice. As the evening wore on and the sky outside darkened to navy blue, they began to gather their things, slow, reluctant, like they did not want the night to end, but knew it had to. At the door, they each hugged her, real hugs, the kind that last a few seconds longer than necessary, the kind that say things words cannot. Marcus held her tight. "I get it now," he whispered. "What you did, I get it." Sienna kissed her cheek. "I'm sorry I said I'd never forgive you." Jordan just held on, his arms strong and sure. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't." Victoria stood on the porch and watched them drive away, their taillights disappearing down the hill into the city below. The house was quiet again. But this time it did not feel empty. It felt like peace. She went back inside, poured herself another glass of wine, and sat on the couch looking out at the lights of the city. Somewhere out there, 3 people she loved more than life itself were building lives that belonged to them, not because she had handed them everything, but because she had finally given them nothing. And in that nothing they had found themselves. 6 months had passed since that October evening. 6 months since the doorbell rang and her children stood on her porch with wine and wilted flowers in gratitude. 6 months since Victoria had felt the weight of motherhood shift from burden to blessing. Winter had come and gone, soft and mild as California winters tend to be. Now it was early spring, and the hills were green again, dotted with wildflowers that appeared overnight like small miracles. Victoria stood in her home office, looking out at the view she had earned, and felt something she had not felt in years. Contentment. Her company had just closed a major acquisition, a competitor firm, smaller but innovative, with technology that would catapult her consulting platform into new markets. The deal had taken 3 months to negotiate, countless late nights, conference calls that stretched past midnight, lawyers and accountants circling every word of every contract. But she had done it. The board had applauded when she announced the final terms. Champagne had been poured in crystal flutes. Her CFO had clapped her on the back and called her a genius. Her phone had buzzed with congratulatory messages from investors, colleagues, rivals, who respected her enough to acknowledge the victory. But the message that mattered most came in a group text from her children. Marcus had written first, "Heard about the deal. Congrats, Mom." Then Sienna, "You're kind of a badass." And Jordan, "Dinner this weekend? Our treat." Victoria smiled, typed back quickly, "I'd love that." She slipped the phone into her pocket and returned to the window, watching the light change across the hills. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago. Exhausted. Trapped. Enabling her children's stagnation while her own life slipped away in increments too small to notice until it was almost too late. That woman felt like a stranger now. Victoria had changed, not just in the obvious ways: the redecorated house, the thriving business, the freedom to travel without guilt, to work late without apology, to exist without constantly monitoring someone else's needs. She had changed in deeper ways, in the way she moved through the world, in the way she spoke, in the certainty that she had done the right thing, even when it hurt, even when her children hated her, even when every maternal instinct screamed at her to relent. She had learned that love was not always soft. Sometimes it was steel wrapped in kindness. Sometimes it was saying no when yes would be easier. Sometimes it was letting people fall so they could learn to stand. Her therapist had warned her that the hardest part would not be the initial confrontation. It would be the waiting, the uncertainty, the not knowing if her children would rise to the challenge or crumble under the weight of real responsibility. But they had risen. Not perfectly, not without stumbling, but they had risen. Victoria walked downstairs to the kitchen and began preparing for the weekend dinner. She wanted to cook for them, to fill the house with the smells of home, to show them that this door was always open, even if the terms had changed. She pulled out her mother's old recipe book, pages yellowed and stained, handwritten notes in the margins. Her mother had been gone for almost 30 years now, but Victoria could still hear her voice in the kitchen instructions. A pinch of this, a handful of that. Taste as you go. Her mother had raised Victoria alone after her father left when she was 6. 3 jobs, no complaints, no self-pity. Just work and love and the quiet belief that struggle was the crucible in which character was forged. Victoria had resented it sometimes as a child. The second-hand clothes. The Christmases without extravagance. The nights when her mother came home so tired she fell asleep on the couch, still wearing her work uniform. But her mother had been teaching her something vital. She had been showing her that survival required more than luck or hope. It required grit. It required the willingness to do hard things when easy things were more appealing. And now, standing in her own kitchen with her mother's recipe book open before her, Victoria finally understood the gift she had been given. Not comfort, not ease, but preparation. She had tried to give her children something different. She had tried to spare them the struggle, to smooth every rough edge, to ensure they never felt the sting of want or the weight of real consequence. And in doing so, she had nearly destroyed them. But it was not too late. She had caught it in time, she had made the hard choice, and now they were learning what she should have taught them years ago. That nothing worth having comes easy, that self-respect is earned, not inherited, that the greatest gift you can give someone is the belief that they are capable of standing on their own. Victoria spent Friday afternoon cooking. Lasagna, her mother's recipe, layers of pasta and ricotta, and sauce that had to simmer for hours. Garlic bread. A salad with vegetables from the farmer's market. A tiramisu she assembled with the kind of care usually reserved for important presentations. Saturday arrived bright and clear. The kind of day that makes you believe in new beginnings. Victoria set the table on the deck overlooking the hills. Real plates, not paper. Cloth napkins. Candles that would be lit when the sun went down. She was nervous, not because she doubted they would come, but because she wanted everything to be perfect. She wanted them to feel welcomed, valued, loved. At 6 o'clock, she heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Then voices, laughter, the sound of a door closing. They appeared around the side of the house, walking together. Marcus in the lead, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that looked new. Sienna beside him in a simple dress, her hair down, smiling. Jordan trailing slightly behind, carrying a small potted plant. Victoria met them on the deck, and for a moment they all just stood there, looking at each other, reading the changes written on each other's faces. The lines that had appeared, the softness that had returned, the quiet confidence that had replaced the defensive anger. Then Marcus stepped forward and hugged her, and the others followed, and suddenly they were all holding each other in a tangle of arms and laughter, and something that felt like forgiveness. "The food's getting cold," Victoria said, her voice thick. They sat around the table as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Victoria served the lasagna, the smell of it filling the evening air. They passed plates and poured wine and for a few minutes said nothing, just ate and savored and existed together. Then Marcus cleared his throat. "I need to tell you something," he said. Victoria looked up, concern flickering across her face. "I got accepted to a management training program," he continued, It's with a restaurant group. Corporate side. They want me to start in 3 months. Sienna gasped. Marcus, that's amazing. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed his whole face. I almost didn't apply. I thought I wasn't qualified. But my boss at the bar pushed me, said I had a knack for it. For managing people, for seeing what needed to be done and doing it. Victoria reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm so proud of you. I wouldn't have even been bartending if you hadn't kicked me out, Marcus said quietly. I'd still be in that room upstairs, applying to jobs I didn't really want, waiting for something perfect to fall into my lap. You saved me from myself. Sienna spoke next, setting down her fork. I got promoted, junior account manager. It came with a raise, not huge, but enough that I can afford my own place. No roommate. Just me. Jordan grinned. Look at you, corporate girl. Sienna laughed. I know, right? 6 months ago I thought marketing was selling out. Now I actually love it. I love the strategy, the creativity, the challenge of making people care about something. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to make this moment about her emotions. What about you, Jordan? She asked. Jordan set down the plant he had brought, placing it in the center of the table. It was a small succulent, green and thriving. I changed my major again, he said. Victoria's heart sank slightly. But this time it's for real, Jordan continued quickly. Environmental engineering. I met with an advisor who helped me map out a plan. 4 semesters left. Then I want to work on renewable energy projects, solar, wind, things that actually matter. He looked at Victoria, his eyes serious. I spent 22 years not knowing what I wanted because I never had to want anything. You gave me everything, and that made me nothing. Jordan, Victoria started, but he held up a hand. No, let me finish. I was angry at you for months. I thought you were punishing us. But you weren't. You were teaching us. And I get it now. I get that you loved us enough to let us struggle. The sun had dipped below the hills now, and the sky was painted in shades of pink and purple. Victoria lit the candles on the table, and they flickered in the gentle breeze. They talked for hours, about work and roommates and the small victories and defeats that made up daily life, about money and budgets and the shock of paying bills, about the satisfaction of earning something, of building something, of standing on your own 2 feet and knowing you put yourself there. Marcus talked about a customer at the bar, a woman in her 70s who came in every Thursday and ordered the same drink and told him stories about her late husband, how listening to her had taught him patience, how serving people had taught him humility. Sienna talked about a campaign that had failed spectacularly, how she had cried in the office bathroom, how her boss had found her and told her that failure was data, that every mistake was a lesson if you were brave enough to learn from it. Jordan talked about a class project, building a small-scale solar panel from scratch, how his hands had cramped from the detailed work, how he had stayed up until 3 in the morning troubleshooting, how it had finally worked and he had felt a rush of pride unlike anything he had experienced before. And Victoria listened, really listened, not as a mother waiting to fix their problems, but as a woman who respected these people, who admired them, who saw them as equals. When the food was gone and the wine bottles empty, they moved to the living room. Marcus built a fire in the fireplace even though the night was not particularly cold. They sat on the floor like they used to when they were children, backs against the couch, watching the flames dance. Can I ask you something? Sienna said quietly. Of course, Victoria replied. Did you ever doubt yourself after you kicked us out? Victoria considered the question carefully, every single day. Sienna looked surprised. I questioned everything, Victoria continued, whether I was too harsh, whether I should have given you more time, whether I was destroying our relationship forever. I barely slept for the first month. But you didn't change your mind, Marcus said. No, Victoria said, because every time I doubted myself, I asked one question. Am I helping them or hurting them by letting this continue? And the answer was always the same. What was the answer? Jordan asked. That love is not about making people comfortable, Victoria said. It's about preparing them for a world that doesn't care how comfortable they are. The fire crackled. Sparks drifted up the chimney. Your grandmother taught me that, Victoria continued. She worked herself to the bone to give me opportunities, but she never gave me things I didn't earn. She never let me believe the world owed me anything, and I hated her for it sometimes. Victoria paused, remembering. But when she died and I was standing on my own, I realized she had given me the greatest gift possible. She had made me strong. I want to be like that, Sienna said softly. When I have kids someday, I want to love them enough to let them struggle. Marcus nodded. I used to think you didn't care about us, because you worked so much, because you missed things. But now I understand. You cared enough to build something that would outlast you, that would give us options. And then you cared enough to take those options away until we learned to create our own, Jordan added. Victoria felt the tears come now, unstoppable. But they were good tears, clean tears, the kind that wash away old wounds and leave something new in their place. They stayed until late, until the fire burned down to embers and the candles flickered out. When they finally stood to leave, the goodbye was different than it had been in October. This time, there was no reluctance, no sense of obligation. Just the easy affection of people who chose to be together. At the door, Marcus turned back. Same time next month? He asked. Victoria smiled. I'll be here. After they left, she walked through the quiet house, blowing out candles, putting away dishes, tidying up. But she moved slowly, savoring the lingering warmth of their presence. She stood on the deck one last time, looking out at the city lights scattered across the valley like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, her children were driving home to their own lives, their own struggles, their own victories. And for the first time since they were born, Victoria was not afraid for them. She was proud. The months continued to unfold like pages in a book she had not known she was writing. Spring turned to summer. The hills turned gold again, dry and beautiful under the relentless California sun. Victoria's company continued to grow, but she had learned to set boundaries. She worked hard, but not obsessively. She traveled when necessary, but came home when she wanted. She said no to opportunities that did not align with her values. She had learned that success meant nothing if you sacrificed yourself to achieve it. Her children visited regularly now. Not every weekend, but often enough that the house felt lived in again. But it was different now. They did not come because they needed anything. They came because they wanted to share their lives. Marcus brought his girlfriend one Sunday, a woman named Clara, who managed a community center and spoke with the kind of quiet intelligence that reminded Victoria of herself at that age. They sat on the deck and talked about Marcus's plans to open his own restaurant someday. Not soon, but someday. When he had learned enough. When he had saved enough. When he was ready. Sienna came with a portfolio of her work, designs she had created for clients ranging from local coffee shops to small tech startups. She was building a reputation. People were starting to ask for her by name. She talked about going freelance eventually, about the fear and excitement of betting on herself. Jordan brought textbooks and showed Victoria diagrams of solar arrays and wind turbines. He talked about internships he was applying for, about research projects he wanted to join, about a future that finally had shape and purpose. And Victoria listened and encouraged and offered advice when asked. But mostly she just witnessed. She bore witness to their becoming. One evening in late July, almost exactly a year since she had handed them the letters, Victoria received a call from Marcus. Hey, Mom, he said. Can you come to the restaurant tomorrow night? Around 8? Victoria frowned. Is everything okay? Yeah, he said. She could hear the smile in his voice. Just trust me. The next evening, Victoria drove to the bar where Marcus worked. She had been there once before, shortly after he started. A dive place in Oakland with sticky floors and neon signs. But when she arrived, she saw that things had changed. The outside had been repainted, the neon signs replaced with subtle lighting, the windows cleaned until they shone. She walked inside and stopped short. The entire place had been transformed. New tables, new chairs, a proper bar instead of the scarred wood counter that had been there before. And behind the bar, Marcus, wearing a crisp white shirt, polishing glasses with practiced ease. But he was not alone. Sienna sat at one of the tables, a laptop open in front of her. showing something to a man in a suit. Jordan stood near the window, talking animatedly with a woman holding a clipboard. Marcus looked up and saw Victoria. He grinned and waved her over. "What is all this?" Victoria asked. Marcus set down the glass he was holding. "The owner is retiring. He offered to sell me the place." Victoria's eyes widened. "Marcus." "I can't afford it on my own," he continued, "but Sienna is helping with the marketing and branding. Jordan is consulting on making it energy efficient, and I found an investor who believes in the concept." He gestured around the space. "We're turning it into a farm-to-table gastropub, local ingredients, sustainable practices, a place that actually means something." Victoria looked around, seeing it now. Not a dive bar, but a vision, a dream taking shape in wood and glass and light. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "We wanted you to see it first," Sienna said, walking over, "before the official opening, because none of this would have happened if you hadn't kicked us out." Jordan joined them, grinning. "Turns out being forced to figure out our lives was the best thing that ever happened to us." They gave her a tour, showing her the kitchen that would be installed, the menu they had drafted, the timeline for opening. They moved with confidence, with purpose, with the kind of collaborative energy that comes from people who respect each other. As the evening wore on and the light faded outside, they sat together at one of the new tables. Marcus poured wine. Sienna pulled out her phone and showed Victoria the logo she had designed. Jordan explained the solar panels they would install on the roof. And Victoria sat there, surrounded by her children, and felt something she had not felt in years. Complete. Not because they needed her, but because they had become people she genuinely liked, people she admired, people who were building lives of substance and meaning. At the end of the evening, as they were locking up, Marcus turned to Victoria. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For loving us enough to let us go." Victoria pulled him into a hug, then Sienna, then Jordan. They stood there in the empty restaurant that would soon be full of life, holding each other in the fading light. "I didn't let you go," Victoria said. "I gave you back to yourselves." 2 months later, on a Saturday evening in September, Victoria stood outside the newly opened restaurant. The sign above the door read, "Roots in Elegant Script." Through the windows, she could see the place was packed, every table full, people laughing, glasses clinking. She had been invited to the opening night, but she had declined. This was their moment, their victory. She did not need to be at the center of it. But she had come tonight, quietly, to see it for herself. She watched through the window as Marcus moved between tables, greeting customers, his face bright with pride. As Sienna stood near the entrance, directing a photographer, capturing moments for social media. As Jordan sat at the bar, talking with a young couple, probably explaining the solar panels and composting system he had helped design. They had done it. Not because she had paved the way, but because she had stepped aside and let them build their own path. Victoria turned to leave, ready to let them have their night. But as she did, she heard a voice behind her. "Mom?" She turned. All three of them stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the restaurant. "What are you doing out here?" Sienna asked. "Just wanted to see it," Victoria said. "I didn't want to intrude." Marcus shook his head. "You're not intruding. Your family." He held out his hand. "Come inside." Victoria hesitated, then took his hand. Sienna took her other hand. Jordan walked ahead, holding the door. They led her inside to a table in the corner, a quiet spot with a reserved sign on it. They sat down together, and Marcus signaled a waiter. "This is on us," he said firmly when Victoria tried to protest. The meal was extraordinary, every dish thoughtfully prepared, every flavor intentional. Victoria ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the moment. The knowledge that her children had created something beautiful, something that would outlast this night, something that was entirely theirs. When dessert came, a chocolate cake with imperfect frosting, Sienna laughed. "I made it again," she said. "It's still probably terrible." But it was not terrible. It was perfect. As the night wound down and the restaurant began to empty, they sat together in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that does not need to be filled with words. Finally, Victoria spoke. I want to tell you something, she said. When I handed you those letters a year ago, I was terrified. I thought I might lose you forever. You almost did, Marcus said honestly. I know, Victoria said, but I had to believe that you were strong enough to survive without me, that I had given you enough, even if it did not feel like it at the time. You did, Jordan said. You gave us everything we needed. We just didn't know it yet. Victoria smiled, tears threatening again. The greatest gift I ever received was struggle, and the hardest thing I ever did was give that same gift to you. Sienna reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. We understand now. We really do. They sat there until the last customer left and the staff began cleaning up. Then they walked out together into the cool September night. Victoria stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the sign, Roots. Why did you name it that? She asked. Marcus smiled. Because no matter how far we grow, we never forget where we came from. They hugged goodbye, long and tight. Then Victoria walked to her car and drove home, the city lights blurring past her windows. When she arrived at her house, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood on the deck, looking out at the hills bathed in moonlight. Her phone buzzed. A group text from her children. Thank you for tonight, for everything, for being the kind of mother who loved us enough to let us fall. We love you. Victoria typed back through tears. I love you too, always. She set the phone down and looked up at the stars scattered across the night sky like promises. She had given her children the hardest gift, the gift of nothing, the gift of struggle, the gift of having to build their own lives with their own hands. And they had taken that gift and transformed it into something beautiful. Not comfort, not ease, but purpose, meaning, self-respect. The things that mattered most. Victoria raised her glass to the night sky, to her mother's memory, to the long journey that had brought her here, to the storms she had survived and the woman she had become, to the children she had raised and then released, to the understanding that love is not always soft. Sometimes it is steel, and that is exactly what makes it strong. The end.